In this lesson, we'll further increase the render settings for a presentation image. Now, one thing I do want to mention just before I do start increasing any settings is that remember that we have been trying to work throughout this course to obtain a speed modeling workflow. Now, remember that if you overdo your settings, any time that you may have gained in modeling or in preparing your scene would be counteracted by having an overly long render time. So try to keep those render times to an absolute minimum. Try to do a bit of photoshopping in the post-production to give your image a better look, and that workflow will generally be much quicker than trying to overdo any lighting or any special effects within 3D Max. In any case, I'm going to hit F10 and I'm just going to go through a few more settings that you may want to increase slightly to get a better looking image. First of all, we can start in our Common tab, and the obvious evident one is to increase your size of your image. Now, depending on what size and what format you need to print at, you want to make sure that you choose the appropriate size and especially the appropriate aspect ratio for the actual prints that you are intending on doing. So the next thing would be to go down to your anti-aliasing. If you do want to have anti-aliased results, you may want to do that. You will, however, see that if you don't have a very powerful computer, the anti-aliasing in itself will end up chewing a lot of time. So most of the time I just end up increasing my render size instead of increasing or using anti-aliasing filter in the actual render. So as I scroll down, there isn't really much that I change in the rest of it. Within color mapping, everything will stay the same. Within the irradiance and light cache, I'm going to increase a couple of settings. If you are in a rush, you can just jump in and go straight to medium. Otherwise, you can increase the subdivisions, and you can also very slightly increase the interpolated subdivisions just to smooth out any secondary lighting or any patches that there might be from the light bouncing around. So what you then want to do is to also increase your light cache. So the subdivisions here I would increase to 1000 and the sample size would get dropped to 0.01. I wouldn't really increase the settings any more than that for most everyday purposes. Then in terms of the filters, I would have the nearest turned on and a pre-filter, and the rest I would leave as is. In terms of settings, the noise threshold, you can bring this down, but I would only bring it down if I do see visible and unnecessary noise within my image. Remember as well that noise can be created from other areas, not necessarily just the noise filter. So you can have a look at subdivisions of other objects, such as your lighting and your materials, that might be creating a noisy result no matter what the noise threshold here. So try and keep this figure as high as you can, because a tiny incremental change will hugely affect your render time. So if you do have to go below 0.005, you could go down to 0.002 or to a maximum of 0.001 at the absolute limit of what I would use for the noise threshold. If you do absolutely want to increase your settings even further, you can very incrementally increase your global subdivisions multiplier, but again I would only use it once I've tested everything else, and I would rather go and increase the subdivisions on each material or each light individually based upon which light and material is causing a problem in terms of a speckly effect or something that isn't desirable, instead of changing the subdivisions on a global level. In terms of the render settings, I wouldn't really do anything else. Sometimes it does help to have a couple of elements, and I do just want to very quickly mention this because it does help. When you do add elements, the two that I use the most would be a object ID. So for example, if I wanted to choose this facade, I could select all of these facade objects, right click, go to my object properties and give it an object ID. So here I could choose an object ID of, let's say, 5, and everything else in my scene hasn't been assigned an object ID yet. So if I do have an element, for example, here I have V-Ray object ID, I'm going to get an image at the end of my render which will show me a separate color for that entire object ID. The other one that I use quite frequently would be V-Ray raw reflection, and that one I would use especially when I have a lot of glossy objects and I want to boost the reflections in post-production. So those are two elements that are definitely quite helpful to have in your render element tab. So besides that, the other things that you can increase are your individual lights. You can go down to the subdivisions for those lights and you can increase that subdivision if you like. You can also add area shadows if you would like these shadows to be slightly softer. As soon as you have an area shadow, there is a larger surface of light that is projecting outwards. So you're going to have less crisp shadows when you include that area shadow in your calculation. So in terms of the subdivisions, these can be increased from 8 to about 16 or 32. I wouldn't really go much higher, and I would only do it for the lights where I absolutely see it being necessary. Very often when we have a sun object, if it is at a very large or low angle and we do get a very long shadow being stretched out, then sometimes we do see that grain in that shadow. So we would increase the subdivisions only for the lights that have those problems. Then furthermore, in our materials, if you go into your, for example, your water material and you see that there is a bit of speckling happening that you don't want, you can increase the subdivisions just on that material. So that is pretty much all I would do. I just quickly wanted to walk you through that so that you can see those higher render settings. I'm in my own time going to do a couple of shots of this project, and the main thing that I wanted to carry through with you up to this point in the course is just the speed modeling workflow. I'm not really that concerned with the images that I'm going to pull out because this is quite a conceptual building. You've already gone and had a look at what some of those images look like. And I think just to finish this lesson off, I'm going to pause the video and quickly render what we have right now and just have a look at what the render time is, and basically then we can go across to the final lesson where I'm just going to give a quick PowerPoint slide with about 2 or 3 slides just with a couple of final tips that basically recap all of these speed modeling tips that I've been covering throughout the course. So here we go. We're going to start the render and let's see what the result is. So here we can see our last rendered result for the course, and this can now be taken across into Photoshop, and we can go and brighten and add more color and more depth to it if we like. Now the main thing that I wanted to show you throughout this course is not necessarily the image or the design, but rather the process that you can take and how you can create both simple objects and also really complex objects and do it in a really quick and easy way. That is the main thing that I wanted to convey to you. So whether you like the design or not is really besides the point. The main thing is how quickly you can create what you have in your mind and how quickly you can get it all out to the client in front and succeed in the project. So just to show you the other render element layers, this is the one with the reflection. So this is just a pure raw reflection. So if I wanted to boost the reflection in the water, for example, I could add this in Photoshop and then just merge the two together using either an overlay or using a screen overlay type. Then this is the one which is basically outlining my facade, which has got the object ID, and nothing else has been assigned an object ID. That's why we get a plain black surrounding. So this would be quite handy because I could go and take this now in Photoshop and use an image select tool to basically just select that color out so that I could then make edits to this facade if I wanted to add more contrast or add a color tinge to it. Basically it is quite helpful. So these are the layers that I generally work with my workflow. So since this course is not really all about Photoshop, if you do want to go into all the Photoshopping that happens post rendering, you can have a look at the other courses on Digital Tutors that I've created, and there you will have all those steps that include all the Photoshopping. So the main course here is focusing on the modeling, and I'm going to give a tiny summary of those steps in the next lesson. So definitely have a look at that. It's going to be extremely short, and it's just going to give you a quick rundown for once and for all to basically summarize it all up. So thanks a lot for watching this far.